All right, here we go. Happy Wednesday night, everyone. My name's Amanda Sutton. I'm the Events and Marketing Director for Bookworks, your 36-year-old independent bookstore in Albuquerque's North Valley. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And for our virtual events that we had in 2020, we did 77 events between April and December on the Zoom front. And here we are still doing that. We hope we'll be back in the store and doing live events later this year. But for the unforeseeable future, here we are. We have some events planned through April and May on our calendar. You can go to our website, which is bkwrks.com. You can buy books there. You can find events, reading recommendations, staff picks, bestsellers, etc. Thank you so much for shopping local at our store or your favorite independent bookstore, wherever you are. I'm sure some of you are probably from Santa Fe. We love collected works, of course. Please do remember to support your local businesses during this time. January especially is a pretty rough month for retail. So if you have any gifts you want to buy for people later in the year, this would be a great time to do it. Okay. Again, my name is Amanda. Thank you for joining us. We've got a few other people in the waiting room I'll let in. We're very pleased to have Miriam Sagan with us here tonight. Miriam has a new novel out called Shadow on the Minotaur that takes us from Sarajevo to Brooklyn. I'm so excited to hear more. I know mostly about Miriam's work from her prolific career as a poet and publisher of Tres Chicas Press up in Santa Fe in particular, and she's got several new books that she's put out in the last couple of years. She's told me she's been writing prolifically during the pandemic. We can talk a little bit more about process if you'd like during the Q&A. We will do that after the reading. If you have a question that comes up, you can always type that into the chat. And then during the Q&A, I'm also happy to call on you. So if you want to raise your hand or send me a note, we can do it that way. All right, Miriam Sagan is with us tonight to tell us about this new book, Shadow on the Minotaur. The other books she's published in the last couple of years include Bluebeard's Castle by Red Mountain Press, 100 Cups of Coffee, and Beasts. She is a two-time winner of the New Mexico-Arizona Book Awards, as well as a recipient of the City of Santa Fe's Mayor Award for Excellence in the Arts. She's been highly involved for years in the New Mexico poetry and writing scene, and is also a wonderful teacher, retired from Santa Fe Community College. Miriam, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm happy to see you. I can't wait to hear more.
Amanda, thank you. I was happy to see you, and Bookworks is, very special to the writers of New Mexico. And thank you for having me. I have other thanks that are due. Thanks to Susan Gardner, who's my publisher and editor, without whom this book would be a pipe dream. But also, this book was not that easy to write. It took me over 3 years to write. And when I would stall out or panic or have some kind of parallel universe copy editing problem, my husband, Rich Feldman, really took care of me and it. And so the book is also dedicated to him.
Hey.
So what I'm going to do is sort of set the scene a little, read you some short sections, and talk about process. I realized a little earlier this evening that my desire to just tell you the whole book as if we were in a broken elevator together is something I should resist, because you could read the book. I forgot that part. So the novel opens in the sort of mid-late 90s, after the war in Bosnia, after the Berlin Wall has come down, and my heroine, Thea, has been in Paris and she comes to New York. And I'm going to read you the opening, which will set up a variety of problems that are hers to solve. Thea stepped out of the terminal at John F. Kennedy International Airport and took the first cab in line. The driver pitched her medium-sized suitcase and jammed backpack into the trunk. He was Ethiopian, tall and slim with a gold tooth. She gave him the Brooklyn address. A nice neighborhood, he said. It's come up. People from all over the world. Lots of different kinds of grocery stores. You like to cook? Yes. Where are you from? In his rear view mirror, he could see a pretty woman in her mid-20s, ash blonde hair, gray eyes, her mouth turned slightly down. You won't have heard of it, she said. Try me. She gave the name of her village, the place she'd left as a child, a hamlet really, with its long line of syllables. He heard the hint of an accent in her voice. Former, he was guessing, former Yugoslavia. Sarajevo? She nodded, but he saw it. You were there in the war? He wanted to talk more now, talk about what he himself knew about war. Every war was different, the flavors, the languages, but in the end, the grief was the same. He listened to the news. He knew what had gone on. 100,000 people dead, just the size of a small city. But if you knew those people, even just one. Actually, I've come from Paris, she said. She couldn't believe she was talking like this to him. But then again, it felt like she had barely spoken to anyone in months. And you're here for cab drivers, concierges, secret police. They could all be unrelenting in their interrogation, Thea thought. I'm going to school, NYU, industrial design. That's good, he nodded. You know, he continued, you can leave a place, try to forget, but it doesn't always work that way. I know all about that, she snapped. Okay, they drove in silence. She barely registered what was out the window, bridges, traffic, people streaming by, brownstones, the low sky. Mostly she felt a vague fluttering in her chest and stomach, fear. She tried the breathing from her yoga class, in her nose, out her mouth. She let out a little gasp, then hoped the driver wouldn't notice. It wasn't working very well, not like it did lying on a mat, listening to the teacher's overly honeyed voice. This is it, the driver said, as they pulled up to a 2-story building with a cream-colored stone facade and a clean sidewalk. He put her luggage on the curb, and she tipped him a generous amount. He got into the cab, hesitated, then leaned out to look at her. She was standing on the cement in the bright light of a late August afternoon. Lady, he said, how did you lose your shadow? Thea glanced down, and indeed, although the suitcase, a spindly tree, and the building itself all cast shadows, she herself did not. I don't know, she said, but the cab was already gone. And then there's a little bit about the cab driver's self-reflection, and I just want to read the last thing he thinks about. He wondered what would become of his passenger, so pretty and sad, and obviously in trouble. He remembered how his older brother had told him, find a pretty woman with car trouble. She's the one for you. And he had. And he drove towards his next passenger, and he forgot all about Thea. So her shadow's missing, and I would say there's no mythological system in which that's a good sign. When I think about how the book was constructed, and I do think writers work this way as a rule, a lot of different things come in at different times. The thing about marry a pretty woman with car trouble is something that my son-in-law's father told him to do. And when I heard it, I thought it was really funny. I didn't realize that years later I was going to use it, but I wanted to briefly be with the cab driver and be inside his head. So he drops her off and she goes in. It's a 4-apartment building, and the next morning she wakes up. She wants to go shopping and she can't cross the street. And she's completely paralyzed by some kind of agoraphobia that's on a mystical level. And so she's on this block in Brooklyn. She has no shadow and she can't cross the street. And that's the setup. And what happens is she meets person after person who attempts to make her okay, who attempts to heal her. And it's kind of, up to you as the reader to figure out at the end whether that's happened or not. And I'll be reading some of those sections. I've never written a novel that wasn't about Americans. I was worried about my distance from her. Could I really get her? I mean, she'd come to visit me so many times, but I had to give her something that connected me to her. And when I was young, I was very sick and I have an injury on my torso, and I gave her the same injury, but I gave it to her from shrapnel. So then I was like, oh, okay, we have something in common. I mean, she's young, she's gorgeous, she's miserable, but I need to connect with her. Well, I mean, she's my character, so I didn't want to give her just post-traumatic stress. I wanted to give her some friends. And so in the bottom apartment are living some very unusual Hassids. They're not acting the way the Hassids of Brooklyn usually act. And we're going to find out a little bit about them now. Just Thea's gone downstairs. She didn't see the downstairs Hasidic man again, but one morning she almost collided with the woman who had her hair tied up in a kerchief and was carrying a large trash bag. Sorry, excuse me. They almost bumped into each other. Let me just take this out. Thea waited. The woman came bustling back. I have to wash my hands. Come on in. Do you want a cup of tea? I don't want to bother you. No bother. Please come in. The apartment was not what Thea had expected. There was a predictable mezuzah slanted on the doorframe, but the apartment itself was barely furnished and felt unlived in. There were no candlesticks or tablecloths, books on fancy serving trays. A small kitchen table was formica with 2 metal folding chairs. Have you lived here long? Thea asked. A few months. I'm Rachel Leah, by the way. Thea. From upstairs. I was hoping to meet you. That seemed odd too, as Thea was no Hassid. Rachel Leah put a kettle on to boil and took 2 generic tea bags and put them in identical white mugs. Thea tamped down her disappointment. From Jews, she'd expected cake, although maybe not the Jews of America, but not even a cookie was in the offing. So do you, they both said awkwardly, then laughed, then were stricken mute. Thea decided to plunge in. Nice of you to invite me in. I've only been in Brooklyn, the US, for a few weeks. Things aren't turning out the way I planned, but people have been very friendly. I'm from Sarajevo. You probably heard of it because of the Civil War. Rachel Leah looked a little blank. I don't follow the news much. Was this in Greece? Someplace like that? Thea was getting tired of explaining. Basically, everyone she's met has no idea where Bosnia is. She wanted to say ethnic cleansing, rape. She wanted to say, you can't even imagine. Instead, she said what she always did. No, it is the former Yugoslavia, all kinds of people living together before the war broke out. Some of our neighbors were Orthodox Jews, not exactly the same as you, but religious. I knew them well, and when the war came, they suffered a lot and eventually got out and went to Israel. I heard they were fine and then lost touch. Thea didn't know why she was babbling, but Rachel Leah regarded her without judgment. She seemed to understand that although Thea's remarks about knowing Jews seemed a bit random, Thea was trying to explain that she was not a Jew-killing fascist. A calm friendliness seemed to emanate from Rachel Leah, so Thea continued. I was wounded by shrapnel, my shoulder is blown out, and I lost a baby, miscarried. Only 3 months, but still. I took the shrapnel because I stepped in front of my fiance, the baby's father, to save him. But afterwards, things deteriorated between us. His family always hated me because, well, we weren't from the same people, different religions. And my family was poor, not good enough for him, so they paid me off. And I went to Paris, but it didn't work out at all. I was so lonely, alone. I had an unhappy love affair. Now that she had started, against all judgment and common sense, Thea couldn't stop. She couldn't look at Rachel Leah's face for fear of shock or criticism. Thea's breath ran out and she chanced to look at Rachel Leah. Rachel Leah was crying quietly. You lost the baby, I'm so sorry. Thank you, was all Thea could manage. And you lost your home and the man you loved who wasn't worthy of you and some of your arm. Thea nodded. The tea kettle had begun whistling and Rachel Leah poured the water. The tea steeped an ordinary brown color, a bland tea taste. But Thea was grateful to have something to sip. I'm so embarrassed, she said. I didn't mean to have all this come spilling out. You've kept it bottled up. Yes, I don't mind, Thea. I'm touched you tell me a stranger. Maybe we're meant to be friends. My life isn't ordinary either right now. I can tell the apartment isn't normal. Yes, I know. And there's a reason. Shall I tell you? And this is something that came to me whole. Oftentimes, writers say that they work from a what if, and I was driving around one day and I thought, what if there was a very Orthodox Hasidic young woman who couldn't have children, who figured out a way to have children? And so this is her story and how it connects. Thea nodded, relieved to have the spotlight off her problems and quite curious about Rachel Leah. Moshe, my husband, and I, you met him, right? On the stairs? He helped me on the first day. He's a kind man. The marriage was arranged, of course. I was 18, he a little older. That was 3 years ago. I loved him immediately. You can't tell from the surface, but he is very caring and thoughtful. And he fell madly in love with me. She blushed. That's not something I expected, not something women talk about. I thought maybe it wasn't even true or all right, but well, we love each other and we can't have children. After a year, we got tested. It's me, I'm barren, and my mother-in-law was pressuring him to divorce me. Thea flinched. I didn't think, it's not that usual, but it happens, Rachel Leah said flatly. That's terrible, how unfair. Yes, and Moshe told me he'd kill himself if we were parted, which is a terrible sin. And so I got an idea. You've heard about surrogates? Thea nodded. So I investigated a little. I'd heard gossip. Turns out there's a rabbi who fixes up barren, infertile couples with surrogates. It's expensive. The woman wasn't Jewish, but she agreed to convert for more money. We used my husband's, sperm for artificial insemination. None of this is really allowed. It's a gray zone. Our own rabbi would forbid it. This other rabbi, he's a very holy person, but unusual. How pregnant are you? Thea asked. It seemed like the most polite way to put it. We're 4 months along, 5 more to go. We'll be at the birth. It's a girl. I go to the sonograms. I'll cut the umbilical cord. And so we see here a kind of a crisscross. Rachel Leah's name, if you know, the Jewish Bible tells you that she's going to have problems in this way. And her problem is indeed solved. And it's part of what solves Thea's problem. And at the end of their conversation, Rachel Leah says, well, I don't want to be rude, but you know what? Your shadow, it's missing. Thea practically spat out her tea. Rachel Leah, does everyone know? Can everyone see that? And yes, indeed, everyone can see that. And various people sort of ascertain that Thea has not sold her soul to the devil. That would be a pretty classic American read on it. You know, I met a man at the crossroads and he offered me thus and such, and I gave him my soul for money. It seems to have become detached from her more innocently than that. So I've got my heroine and I'm revising this book, and suddenly I'm in lockdown in Santa Fe. And the whole central part of the book is about being on the block. Since she's my heroine, my character, I decided I'd get her a boyfriend. I got her a job, got her a super nice job, just a couple of afternoons a week, working in a nursery and, working with flowers and plants. And I got her a yoga class, and I got her an acupuncturist. I got her everything that a heroine needs. Then she needed a boyfriend. And so he has got a gallery on the north side of the block. His name is Josh Lopez. He feels very real to me. I'm sorry, he's not real. A reader of mine said that she wanted him, but he doesn't really exist. So he can be shared. But anyway, Josh understands that she's not able to leave the block, right? But he's a little bored with just hanging around, and he decides that he's going to take her to a subterranean nightclub that you go through a manhole to get to. And it's called Babel. However, in my second novel, Black Rainbow, there's a club called Babylon, and it's shaped like a ziggurat. It's on the Lower East Side, and it's a lot about elevation. Things go up. Well, times have changed. Taste in music has changed, and happenings are out, raves are in. And so Babylon's not called Babylon anymore. It's called Babel. And it's no longer about going to the sky. It's now about going into the earth. They go down, they get in, they spend some lovely time dancing and drinking. And then Thea has to pee. So she decides to go to the bathroom. And you might have been in this bathroom once in your life. The woman's bathroom was chaos. Surprisingly large, it has surprisingly few stalls and sinks. A woman was reading tarot cards at a folding table in one corner. 2 women were making out so intensely, Thea looked away. It was too private. Another woman was snorting coke off a corner of a sink. 1 line, 2. A stall seemed open. Thea didn't see any legs. She peed with relief, wadded up some toilet paper, stood up and flushed. But when she reached for the lock, the scene had changed. She was outside. It was daytime. She was in a clearing in a forest where the air was warm, but some snow lingered. Thea saw a little house in a circle of birch trees. The front door was carved in the shape of a big mushroom and painted red with white spots. A woman opened the door, stepped forward, and looked Thea directly in the eyes for a long moment. The woman was wearing what appeared to be a folk costume with a red bodice and long white ruffled skirt. On her head was a crown of flowers and ribbons. Her hair flowed below her shoulders, her skin was creamy, and her eyes piercing. Vasilisa? Thea asked. So you still know who I am? The woman laughed, a low alto pitch. Vasilisa the Wise. Of course I know who you are, although I haven't seen you since I was a child, and then not so often. Most people never see me. I've been lucky. Luck has nothing to do with it. I'm only seen when I want to be. Thank you. And we have seen each other more recently than your childhood. We have? How soon they forget, Vasilisa said. Have you forgotten that party? Right after you and Jan got together? The art school party with too much to drink and some opium with the hash, with a spirit board calling on me and spelling out advice. And you asked what was in your heart, and I told you that you and Jan would be happy together. Oh, that party, Thea said unenthusiastically. I was pretty hungover and we weren't happy, maybe just at the start, but never after that. Yes, I might have been mistaken. Vasilisa did not easily admit to being wrong. Thea nodded. Well, you've come all this distance, so I assume you have a question. What do you want to know? Vasilisa continued briskly. Thea paused. These conversations could be tricky. She didn't want to end up asking something stupid like, why are you actually here? Or am I still in the bathroom? Or why am I seeing a Russian enchantress when I'm not Russian? Will I ever get better? Thea asked. No, said Vasilisa the Wise. Okay, now ask again. Will I ever get better? Yes, said Vasilisa. Which? You decide, said Vasilisa, and then not unkindly. I think you are already better. But, said Thea, the clearing vanished, the cottage, Vasilisa. There was cracked cement beneath her feet. Off in the distance, it looked like a bombed out city burning. There was a wall waist high, built of round, smooth white stones, no skulls. It ran along some directional axis she couldn't see from where she stood. This was no genocide with a date and a name, something to horrify the world for a moment before it sank into its vast indifference. Each skull was once a person, each person once a baby, wanted or rejected, fed tenderly or on scraps. This was no bomb or poison gas. Each person was killed face to face, put to the sword by Tamerlane. Hooves shook the earth, and you ran, but then you fell. Thea shuddered, but the vision faded, then disappeared. On closer inspection, she saw a large Gothic arcade lit by hundreds of votive candles. Some kind of clash metal was playing. People were dancing beneath the arches. Josh had been right. It was impossible to figure out how to get back. Instead, Thea kept walking, saw an exit sign, followed it, and found herself standing on the doormat of her own apartment. Josh was asleep in bed. The clock read 4:03 a.m. She could only hope it was the same day and year, but everything looked as she'd left it, and Josh hadn't turned into an old man or a skeleton or anything. Vasilisa comes back several times. She stops wearing the folk costume. It's New York. She starts to wear black leather pants and drink espresso. One of the motifs is about, is it possible to forgive other people or to forgive yourself? And for a long time, Vasilisa in drafts of the novel she was just plain mean. She was an enchantress and she knew what was right and bossy and fun. But I realized eventually that she needed to apologize because in her own way, because she'd been wrong. Thea wasn't happy. Things didn't work out. They were a disaster. Not that you trust a Ouija board, but Vasilisa is real when we come to this book. The last section I'm going to read is the final healing scene in the novel. And it's from a character who I love and I've been trying to work with for many years. Her name is Dr. Rodriguez. She's an anthropologist, Dr. Stella Rodriguez. And I just want to say, because of Jill Biden, that no one ever calls Dr. Stella Rodriguez anything but Dr. Rodriguez, ever, in this book. They're very proud of her. She has tenure. The other people in the apartment building kind of feel that she's one of them. You know, they're taking credit, no reason for the credit. She was in a book that I could never write. She's an anthropologist who studies healing, and she's asked to do a kind of pseudo fake curandera ceremony, and it works very well. So we're going to have Thea visit her. This is just the second to last scene in the book. So Dr. Rodriguez offered Thea a lumpy ceramic mug of steaming mint tea, tasty enough. You brought eggs? Thea showed her the carton. Good. Well, my dear, this is a sort of informal setting, but I'll try and do things correctly. So can you tell me what you want, what you hope this healing will accomplish? Thea hesitated. This may seem silly, but I'd like to go shop at the Imperial Grocers and be able to cross the street. Yes. And your shadow, what about it? Do you want it back? Thea hesitated again, this time for longer. She was so sick of talking about her shadow. But if it came back, she could stop worrying about it. Yes, I do. Thank you, she said. Come lie down on the table. Thea did as she was told and lay on her back. The professor murmured a prayer, extemporaneously calling on the Divine Mother and the elements of fire, water, earth, and air, which inhabited everything, even the streets of Brooklyn. Her hands hovered over Thea, and she took a little broom made of lavender and sage and began sweeping Thea's body, starting with the feet and moving upward. The professor kept an image of the Virgin of Guadalupe securely fixed in her own inner eye so that she wouldn't be distracted by the clutter of astral objects flying off of Thea: skulls, high heels, dumplings, fruit pits, a pistol, ripped books, a skinny cat, and more. Are you doing okay? She asked. Yes, Thea said, but a bit faintly. Do you need some water? Yes, thanks. Thea sat up briefly and drank from the offered glass. The professor kept sweeping. Then she took an egg and began to do the same motion with it that she had done with the little broom, moving it up and down Thea's body. Then, holy fuck, the professor yelped as the egg grew warm, then hot in her hands, and then burst into flames. She dropped it, feeling sure her fingers were singed, but they weren't. What in the fuck, said Thea. The room smelled of burnt feathers and scrambled eggs. I feel like I'm going to pass out, the professor said. Sit on the couch, Thea ordered. Put your head between your legs. The professor complied. I'm less dizzy, thanks, the professor said. The two women sat side by side. What happened? The egg just burst into flames. I bet it burnt the carpet. The professor looked wildly around, but they both saw nothing beneath the massage table, not even a smear of ash. The egg had vanished into thin air. I've never seen anything like that, ever, Dr. Rodriguez said. In all your years of being a curandera? The professor smiled. You know I'm not the real thing. Well, you're some kind of real thing, Thea said. On her way out, she kissed the professor's warm cheek. Stay hydrated, Thea, the professor called after her, then closed the door and began to blow out the candles. It's funny, reading it now, I realize it's the first time in all the different things that people have tried on Thea that she's been able to help somebody. And when she tells the professor to put her head between her knees, I think in a way, it's like that healing is kind of over at that point. I have one last thing to read. It's not that easy to select because the most important theme in the book that I haven't discussed is cake. It's full of cake. Thea makes lots and lots of cakes, and she brings them to everyone. It's her neurotic, hoarding, survival instinct that gets translated into a good way. And everyone in the book has gained like 5 pounds each. And there's majestic cakes, but they're really just a motif. However, I do have one cake recipe, and it's part of a journal entry. Now, when Susan Gardner was reading this book, she wrote me and said, your cake recipe has some things that are inaccurate in it. I'm guessing you're not a baker. Well, that's quite true. I've never baked anything in my life. And but I love cake, and it certainly, symbolizes all that is good on earth. So I'm just going to read you to conclude Thea's she's just keeping a little notebook, some journal entries, and she's writing her dead grandmother every so often. And she started writing on a page with a small coffee stain. I'm in Brooklyn. Fuck, I can't. Something is fucked up. I can't cross the street. I need a doctor who will say what? I'm crazy? Why? Rolot. Ingredients. 5 egg whites, 4 dessert spoons of sugar, 5 egg yolks, 4 dessert spoons of flour, 1 level teaspoon baking powder. Preheat oven to 200 centigrade, 400 Fahrenheit. Beat egg yolks, add the sugar. Beat the egg whites until stiff and fold everything together. 3/4 of a cup is 6 fluid ounces. 1 cup or 8 fluid ounces or a half a pint equals? What is the relationship of cake and snow?